Homeless woman discovers a billionaire, man in a locked car. What he does next will shock you. The setting sun painted long shadows across the bustling city street as Hannah pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. The autumn wind bit through the worn fabric, making her shiver as she walked past the gleaming storefronts and well-dressed people hurrying home from work. Her own home, a hidden spot behind an old warehouse, waited for her across town. She kept her head down, used to being invisible to the crowd around her. The past few months on the streets had taught her that people preferred not to notice those who didn't fit into their comfortable world. Her shoes, donated from a shelter last week, scraped against the concrete as she walked. The fading daylight caught something that made her pause. A sleek, black luxury car parked at an odd angle near the curb. Hannah might not know much about expensive vehicles, but she could tell this one cost more than she'd ever seen in her life. The windows were completely fogged up, which struck her as strange since the engine wasn't running. A muffled thump came from inside the car, followed by what sounded like someone calling out. Hannah approached cautiously, her heart beating faster. Living on the streets had taught her to be wary, but something about those sounds spoke of genuine distress. As she got closer, she could make out a figure moving inside, hands pressing against the foggy driver's side window. The thumping grew more insistent, and now she could clearly hear a man's voice. "Hello? Can anyone hear me? Please!" Hannah rushed to the window, wiping away some of the condensation with her sleeve. Through the clear patch, she saw a man in an expensive suit, his face flushed with panic as he repeatedly tried to force the door open. "Are you okay?" she called through the glass. The man's eyes lit up with relief when he saw her. "The doors won't unlock." His voice was muffled but clear enough. "The electronics died completely and I'm stuck inside. Please, can you help?" Hannah quickly surveyed the car, looking for any way to get him out. "Have you tried the manual lock?" she asked, pointing to where it should be. "It's not working either," he replied, his breathing heavy with anxiety. "Everything's dead." Hannah bit her lip, thinking fast. Her gaze fell on a loose brick in a nearby planter. "Sir, move away from the window and cover your face. I'm going to break the glass." The man, Ethan, she would later learn, nodded and shifted to the passenger seat, shielding his head with his suit jacket. Hannah grabbed the brick, took careful aim at the corner of the driver's window where it would shatter more safely, and struck it hard. The safety glass crackled and spiderwebbed but held together. A second hit created a hole large enough for her to reach in and pull the emergency release. The door finally swung open, and Ethan practically tumbled out, gasping in the fresh air. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and sweat dampened his collar despite the cold evening. "Thank you," he breathed, straightening up and running a shaky hand through his dark hair. "I've been trapped in there for almost an hour. The whole system just died, and none of the emergency releases were working." He looked at Hannah with genuine gratitude, not with the dismissive glance she'd grown accustomed to receiving. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Hannah shuffled her feet, uncomfortable with the attention but glad she could help. "Anyone would have done the same," she said softly, already starting to step back. "No," Ethan said, his voice firm but kind. "Not everyone would have stopped. Not everyone would have helped. Thank you." The streetlights flickered to life as dusk settled into evening, casting a gentle glow over the broken glass scattered on the pavement. Ethan brushed off his suit, still looking somewhat shaken from his ordeal. Hannah stood a few feet away, shifting her weight from one foot to another, unsure whether to leave or stay. "I haven't properly introduced myself," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Ethan Crawford." His voice carried warmth that matched his grateful expression. Hannah hesitated before accepting his handshake. Her hand, rough from exposure to the elements, met his well-manicured one. "I'm Hannah," she replied simply, withdrawing her hand quickly and tucking it back into her jacket pocket. "Hannah," he repeated, reaching for his wallet. "Please, let me give you something for your help. It's the least I can do." He pulled out several crisp bills. She took a step back, shaking her head. The sight of the money made her stomach clench. Not from want, but from pride. "No, really, I don't need that." "Please, I insist," Ethan pressed, still holding out the money. "You saved me from what was becoming a very dangerous situation." Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, both from the cold and discomfort. "What I could really use is just a warm place to sleep tonight," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. The words had slipped out before she could stop them, and she immediately regretted their vulnerability. Ethan's expression shifted as he truly looked at her for the first time, taking in her worn clothes, the tired lines around her eyes, the way she hunched against the cold. His face softened with understanding. "Are you—" he started, then paused, choosing his words carefully. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" Hannah stared at the ground, scuffing her shoe against a piece of the broken glass. "I'll manage. I always do." Her voice was quiet, but carried a thread of strength that spoke of long practice at managing. The traffic continued to flow around them, car lights painting streaks of color on the wet pavement. Ethan seemed to be having an internal debate, his brow furrowed in thought. "I have a house," he said finally. "Well, more of a mansion, really. It's just outside the city, and it has several empty guest rooms." He gestured to his now useless car. "I'll need to call for a ride anyway. You'd be welcome to stay the night." Hannah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise and instinctive suspicion. I couldn't," she stammered, even as the promise of warmth and safety made her heart ache. "It's a big house," Ethan continued gently. "You'd have your own space, complete privacy, no strings attached, just a warm bed for the night, and a chance for me to properly thank you for your help." The wind gusted harder, and Hannah couldn't suppress another shiver. She studied Ethan's face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motives. Instead, she found only sincerity in his eyes and an expression that seemed almost as surprised by his offer as she was. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "You didn't know me either," he pointed out. "But you still stopped to help." He pulled out his phone. "Let me at least call the car. You can decide on the way whether you want to stay or not. No pressure." Hannah hugged herself tighter, weighing her options. Her usual sleeping spot would be cold tonight, and something about Ethan's earnest offer made her want to trust him, despite her careful nature. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Just for tonight." The sleek black car pulled up to a set of ornate iron gates that slowly swung open, revealing a winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured trees. Hannah pressed her face closer to the window, her eyes widening as Ethan's mansion came into view. The stone structure loomed ahead, its windows gleaming in the evening light like dozens of watchful eyes. "Here we are," Ethan said softly, watching her reaction. "Home sweet home." Hannah couldn't find words to respond. The mansion was bigger than any building she'd ever been inside, its architecture a stunning blend of classic and modern design. Stone columns flanked the enormous front door, and warm light spilled from nearly every window. The car came to a stop, and a uniformed man opened the door for them. Hannah stepped out carefully, clutching her worn backpack to her chest like a shield. The air here smelled different, crisp and clean, with hints of flowering shrubs that bordered the circular driveway. "Come on in," Ethan gestured, leading the way up broad stone steps. "I'll show you around." The foyer took Hannah's breath away. A crystal chandelier hung from the soaring ceiling, casting rainbow reflections across marble floors. Her worn boots seemed to echo accusingly in the vast space. "This is—" she started, then fell silent, overwhelmed. "A bit much?" Ethan supplied, with a self-deprecating smile. "My mother's taste runs to the dramatic." He led her through the house, pointing out rooms as they passed. A formal dining room that could seat 20, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a conservatory filled with exotic plants. Hannah followed in a daze, trying not to touch anything. "And this will be your room for the night," Ethan said, opening a door on the second floor. Hannah stepped inside and froze. The guest room was bigger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. A king-sized bed dominated the space, piled high with pillows and what looked like the softest comforter she'd ever seen. A sitting area by the window overlooked manicured gardens, and there were 2 doors leading off the main room. "That's the closet," Ethan pointed, "and through there is your private bathroom. There are fresh towels, and I can have some clothes brought up if you'd like." "This is—" Hannah shook her head, overwhelmed. "It's too much." "It's nothing," Ethan insisted. "Would you like to clean up before dinner? I can have something simple prepared." An hour later, Hannah sat across from Ethan at a small table in what he called the informal dining room, though it still felt fancy to her. She'd showered and changed into borrowed clothes that felt softer than anything she'd worn in years. They ate soup and fresh bread in comfortable silence until Ethan spoke. "I suppose you're wondering about all this." He gestured vaguely at their surroundings. Hannah nodded, carefully setting down her spoon. "I grew up here," he continued, his voice taking on a distant quality. "Third generation of Crawford wealth. My grandfather built an empire from nothing. My father expanded it, and I—" He trailed off, staring into his soup. "I'm expected to carry on the legacy." He looked up, meeting Hannah's eyes. "Do you know what it's like to have your whole life planned out before you're even born? Private schools, Ivy League education, taking over the family business. It was all decided for me." Hannah sat quietly, listening. Her hands remained folded in her lap, unsure how to respond to this glimpse into a world so different from her own. The pressure of expectations he described seemed foreign to her, yet the pain in his voice was familiar. The universal ache of feeling trapped by circumstances beyond one's control. Ethan continued to share his story, his voice growing softer as he spoke about his family's expectations and the weight of their legacy. Hannah listened, offering nothing but her attention, understanding that sometimes that was the greatest gift one could give. Sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains, painting golden patterns across Hannah's face. She blinked slowly, momentarily confused by the softness surrounding her. The bed felt like sleeping on a cloud, nothing like the hard concrete or shelter cots she'd grown used to over the past months. She sat up, running her hand over the silky comforter. The room looked even more impressive in the morning light. A gentle knock at the door made her jump. "Miss?" a woman's voice called. "Mr. Crawford asked me to let you know breakfast will be ready in 30 minutes. There are fresh clothes in the closet if you'd like to change." "Thank you," Hannah replied, her voice still rough with sleep. The closet revealed several outfits with tags still attached. Hannah selected the simplest one she could find, a pair of dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater. They fit perfectly, making her wonder if someone had gone shopping specifically for her overnight. When she made her way downstairs, following the smell of coffee and bacon, she found Ethan already seated at a small table on an enclosed porch. Sunshine poured through the windows, and potted plants created a peaceful atmosphere. "Good morning," he smiled, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I hope you slept well?" "Better than I have in months," Hannah admitted, settling into the chair. A server appeared almost instantly with coffee and a plate of eggs, bacon, and fresh fruit. "I'm glad," Ethan said softly. He stirred his coffee absently, seeming lost in thought. "You know, I've never actually told anyone about how I feel regarding my family's expectations. It felt good to talk about it last night." Hannah nodded, taking a sip of the rich coffee. "Sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger. No history, no judgments." "What about you?" Ethan asked carefully. "How did you end up—" He trailed off, clearly unsure how to phrase the question delicately. Hannah set down her cup, considering her words. "It wasn't one big thing, more like a series of small disasters. Lost my job during company downsizing. Couldn't find new work fast enough. Medical bills piled up from when I broke my arm last year." She pushed a piece of fruit around her plate. "Before I knew it, I couldn't make rent. Then I couldn't afford storage for my things. It's surprising how quickly it all falls apart." Ethan listened intently, his breakfast forgotten. "That must have been terrifying." "It was. Is," Hannah corrected herself. "The hardest part isn't even the physical discomfort. It's the way people look through you, like you're invisible. Or worse, like you're less than human." "Like my family looks at anyone they consider beneath them," Ethan said quietly. "My father? He has very specific ideas about social class, about who matters and who doesn't." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his gesture. "We fought about it last week. He wanted me to lay off workers to increase profits, even though our company is already making record earnings." "What did you do?" Hannah asked. "I refused. Told him I wouldn't destroy people's lives for a few percentage points on a spreadsheet." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He threatened to remove me from my position, replace me with someone more aligned with company values." "Your own father threatened to fire you?" "That's how it works in my family. Everything is about the business, about appearances, about power, real relationships, genuine connections. Those don't matter." He met Hannah's eyes. "Until last night, I couldn't remember the last time I had an honest conversation with anyone." Hannah stepped out onto the stone path, winding through Ethan's garden, wrapping her borrowed cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The morning chill lingered in the air, but the sun promised warmth later. Beside her, Ethan walked with his hands in his pockets, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him yet. "This garden was my mother's pride and joy," he said, gesturing to the meticulously maintained flower beds. "Before she passed away, she'd spend hours out here. Said it was the only place she could truly think." Hannah paused to admire a cluster of late-blooming roses. "It's beautiful. I used to dream of having a garden like this, even just a small one with herbs and vegetables." "Used to?" Ethan asked, stopping beside her. She shrugged, trying to keep her voice light. "Dreams change when you're just trying to survive. These days I mostly dream about having a roof over my head and steady work." They continued walking, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The grounds stretched out before them, perfectly manicured lawns giving way to clusters of old trees. "What about you?" Hannah asked. "What do you dream about?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Freedom," he finally said. "To live life on my own terms, to use our family's resources to actually help people instead of just accumulating more wealth." He kicked at a loose stone. "Sometimes I dream about walking away from it all." "Why don't you?" "Responsibility. Duty. 5 generations of Crawfords built this company, and despite everything, I know we could do real good in the community if we tried." He looked at her. "What would you do if you could do anything?" Hannah hadn't let herself think about possibilities in so long. "I'd like to work with kids, maybe. Before everything happened, I was studying to be a teacher." She smiled sadly. "Had to drop out when money got tight." They reached a small pond, its surface reflecting the cloudy sky above. A pair of ducks glided across the water, leaving ripples in their wake. "It's not too late, you know," Ethan said softly. "To go back to school, to teach." "Maybe," Hannah replied, but her voice held doubt. "Everything feels so far away now." They spent hours walking the grounds, talking about everything and nothing. Ethan told her about his childhood adventures in the old greenhouse, while Hannah shared stories about the community of homeless people who looked out for each other. As they talked, the walls between their very different worlds seemed to thin. The sun was setting by the time they made their way back to the mansion, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Hannah felt a familiar anxiety creeping in, the uncertainty of where she'd sleep tomorrow, of what came next. Ethan must have noticed her expression change. "Hannah," he said, stopping at the bottom of the mansion's steps. "Would you consider staying, just for a few more days?" She hesitated, weighing the offer. The mansion felt like a dream, and dreams had a way of turning into nightmares. But something about Ethan's earnest expression, about the way they'd connected throughout the day, made her want to trust this moment. "Okay," she said quietly. "A few more days." The smile that lit up Ethan's face made her wonder if perhaps she wasn't the only one who needed this connection. He opened the door, gesturing for her to enter the warmth of the house. "Thank you," he said simply, and Hannah knew he meant for more than just agreeing to stay. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Hannah stirred honey into her tea. It had been 5 days since she'd first arrived at the mansion, and each day brought a new understanding of its complex owner. Today, though, something felt different. Ethan sat at the massive oak dining table, absently pushing scrambled eggs around his plate. His usually neat appearance seemed slightly disheveled, his collar askew, his hair uncombed. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, suggesting another sleepless night. "The coffee's fresh if you want some," Hannah offered, trying to break the heavy silence. He looked up, seemingly startled by her voice. "Oh, thanks." His words came out distant, mechanical. Hannah watched as he poured himself a cup with unsteady hands, spilling a few drops on the polished counter. She'd noticed the change starting yesterday, phone calls he'd taken private, lengthy sighs when he thought no one was looking, long periods staring out windows at nothing in particular. Throughout the day, Ethan moved through the mansion like a ghost. He'd start tasks only to abandon them halfway through. A book left open on the sofa, a laptop humming with unanswered emails, a half-written letter crumpled in the wastebasket. Hannah kept her distance, busying herself with small chores she'd taken upon herself, but she couldn't help noticing his deteriorating state. By late afternoon, she found him in the library, slumped in a leather armchair. The room smelled of old books and wood polish, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the floor. Hannah turned to leave, not wanting to intrude, but his voice stopped her. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hannah paused in the doorway. "Sometimes," she answered carefully. "When I was younger, before everything." Ethan gestured to the chair across from him, and Hannah sat down, waiting. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds until he spoke again. "I moved here 6 months ago," he said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "This mansion, it wasn't my choice. My father insisted." He gave a hollow laugh. "Said it was time I lived up to the Crawford name." Hannah remained silent, letting him continue. "I had an apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I could breathe there." His fingers drummed restlessly on the armrest. "But father, he has this vision of what a Crawford should be, where they should live, how they should act." He stood up abruptly, pacing between the towering bookshelves. Every piece of furniture in this place, every painting on these walls, they're all chosen to project an image. The perfect family, the perfect heir. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. And now? Hannah asked softly. Ethan stopped by the window, his silhouette dark against the fading light. Now I feel trapped. Every morning I wake up in this museum of family expectations. Every decision I make is scrutinized through the lens of the Crawford legacy. He turned to face her, his expression vulnerable. I thought moving here would give me some independence, some distance from their constant presence. Instead, I feel more suffocated than ever. Hannah watched him sink back into his chair, the weight of his confession seeming to physically burden him. In that moment, despite the mansion's grandeur surrounding them, she recognized something familiar in his eyes, the same lost look she'd seen in her own reflection countless times. The worst part, he added quietly, is that I don't know how to break free without destroying everything my family has built. Sometimes I think that's exactly what they're afraid of, that I'll ruin the precious Crawford name they've worked so hard to polish. The library's peaceful atmosphere shattered as Ethan's phone buzzed against the wooden side table. Hannah glanced up from the book she'd been reading to see his face tighten at the caller ID. The screen displayed Mother with a formal-looking photo of an elegant woman in pearls. Ethan's hand hovered over the phone, trembling slightly. After 4 rings, he pressed the decline button and slumped deeper into his chair. The phone immediately lit up again, buzzing insistently. You could answer it, Hannah suggested gently, closing her book. No, Ethan said, his voice flat. I really couldn't. He switched the phone to silent and shoved it into his pocket, but Hannah could see the screen continuing to light up through the fabric. The grandfather clock ticked heavily in the corner as they sat in uncomfortable silence. Outside, rain began to patter against the library's tall windows, matching the gloomy mood that had settled over the room. She calls 3 times a day, Ethan finally said, rubbing his temples. Every day, like clockwork. He stood up and walked to the window, watching raindrops trail down the glass. Morning, noon, and night, as if she's checking to make sure I haven't run away. Hannah set her book aside, noting how his shoulders tensed with each word. What does she want? What doesn't she want? He gave a bitter laugh. She wants updates on my progress at Crawford Industries. She wants to know if I'm attending the right social events, meeting the right people, making the right connections. His voice grew tighter with each word. She wants to make sure I'm following the plan she and Father mapped out for me before I was even born. The phone buzzed again, and Ethan pulled it out, staring at the screen with a mixture of frustration and guilt. They've been grooming me to take over Crawford Industries since I was old enough to walk. Private schools, business camps instead of summer fun, internships at the company while my friends were having adventures. He trailed off, lost in memories. And that's not what you want? Hannah asked softly. Ethan turned from the window, his face marked with a deep weariness that made him look older than his years. I never wanted any of it. The business meetings, the corporate politics, the endless networking. He ran a hand through his hair, making it stand up in frustrated spikes. I wanted to be an architect, design homes for people who need them, create spaces that matter. The phone buzzed yet again. This time Ethan pulled out the battery and dropped both pieces on the side table with a clatter. When I told them about architecture school, Mother cried for 3 days. Father didn't speak to me for a week. He sank back into his chair. They called it a phase and redoubled their efforts to push me into the family business, started introducing me as the future CEO of Crawford Industries at every social event. Hannah watched as he picked up a pen from the side table and began fidgeting with it. Now Mother's pushing harder than ever. The current CEO is retiring in 6 months, and she's determined that I'll be ready to step in. His knuckles whitened around the pen. She's already having my office renovated, picking out furniture, planning the announcement party. He set the pen down with deliberate care. Every call is about another meeting I should attend, another board member I need to impress, another strategy session I can't miss. It's like she's trying to script every minute of my life. His voice cracked slightly. And the worst part is, I don't know how to tell her that every time I step into that office building, I feel like I'm dying inside. The morning sun streamed through the bay windows of the mansion's conservatory, casting warm patches of light across the worn pages of Hannah's borrowed book. She'd found herself spending more time here lately, surrounded by Ethan's collection of flowering plants and the gentle bubbling of the small fountain in the corner. Ethan walked in carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "I thought I'd find you here," he said, handing her one. The ceramic was warm against her fingers, and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans filled the air. "It's peaceful," Hannah replied, marking her place in the book. "Reminds me of the library where I used to work." She hadn't meant to share that detail, but something about Ethan made it easier to talk about her past. He settled into the wicker chair across from her. "You worked in a library?" "For 3 years." She took a sip of coffee, perfectly prepared with just a touch of cream, exactly how she liked it. "Before everything fell apart, I loved being surrounded by books, helping people find exactly what they needed." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "What happened?" Hannah traced the rim of her mug with her finger. "Budget cuts. The library closed, and then—" She shrugged, the familiar ache of loss rising in her chest. "One thing led to another. Lost my apartment, couldn't find work fast enough." "I'm sorry," Ethan said softly. "That must have been terrifying." "It was." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "But you know what's strange? Sometimes I feel more secure now than I did back then. At least I know what to expect from life on the streets. There's no illusion of stability to lose anymore." Ethan set his coffee down, leaning forward. "You deserve better than just surviving. Hannah, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met." His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, and Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away, uncomfortable with the emotion building in her chest. "Look who's talking," she deflected. "You're fighting your own battles every day." "Maybe that's why we understand each other," Ethan said quietly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun create dancing patterns through the glass ceiling. Hannah felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years, a feeling of being truly seen and accepted. "I have an idea," Ethan said suddenly. "Would you join me for dinner tonight? There's this restaurant downtown, amazing food, quiet atmosphere. We could talk more, away from—" He gestured vaguely at the mansion around them. Hannah glanced down at her worn clothes. "I'm not exactly dressed for fine dining." "Already thought of that," Ethan said with a small smile. "I had my personal shopper deliver some options to your room. No pressure, but they're there if you want them." Hannah felt her throat tighten at his thoughtfulness. "Ethan, you don't have to—" "I want to," he interrupted gently. "Please? It would mean a lot to me." Looking at his hopeful expression, Hannah found herself nodding. "Okay," she said softly. "Thank you." His face lit up with a genuine smile, the kind that made the weight of his family's expectations seem lighter, if only for a moment. But Hannah could still see the shadow in his eyes, the burden he carried even in his happiest moments. She wondered if he would ever truly be free of it. 7 o'clock? He asked, standing up. 7 o'clock? She agreed, watching as he gathered their empty coffee mugs and headed for the door, his steps just a bit lighter than before. Hannah's fingers trailed along the dark wooden panels that lined the mansion's hallways. After nearly 2 weeks here, she still found herself discovering new corners and hidden spaces. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the tall windows, creating patterns on the antique rugs beneath her feet. She paused at an ornate desk tucked into an alcove she hadn't noticed before. The piece looked older than the other furniture, with intricate carvings decorating its legs and brass handles that had developed a rich patina over time. Something about it drew her closer. The top drawer stuck slightly as she pulled it open. Inside, she found old photographs, yellowed with age, showing a younger woman standing proudly in front of the mansion. Hannah's heart skipped a beat as she recognized Ethan's features in the woman's face. They had the same determined set to their jaw, the same gentle eyes. Beneath the photos lay a stack of legal documents, their edges crisp despite their age. Hannah hesitated, knowing she shouldn't pry, but her eyes caught words that made her pause. Property deed and inheritance. Her hands trembled as she lifted the papers, scanning their contents. The legal language was complex, but the truth was clear. The mansion belonged to Catherine Wellington, Ethan's mother. Every detail was there in black and white. The property transfer, the inheritance terms, even recent tax documents with Catherine's name. "Hannah?" Ethan's voice echoed from the hallway. "Where are you?" She quickly gathered the papers, her heart pounding. "In here," she called back, her voice shakier than she intended. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his smile fading as he saw what she held in her hands. "What are those?" Hannah took a deep breath. "Ethan, I found these by accident, and I know I shouldn't have looked, but—" She held out the documents. "The mansion. It's not yours, is it? It belongs to your mother." The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" "These are property records, tax documents, all in your mother's name." Hannah's voice was gentle but firm. "Did you know?" Ethan took the papers with unsteady hands, his eyes scanning the pages. "No," he whispered. "I thought, when I moved in, it was empty. Dad always said this place would be mine someday." He sank into a nearby chair, the papers dropping to his lap. "I never checked. I just assumed—" "You've been living here without her permission?" Hannah asked softly. "I guess I have." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, looking lost. "All this time, I thought I was standing up to them by living here, making my own way. But I've been—" He trailed off, staring at the documents. Hannah knelt beside his chair. "Why didn't she say anything?" "I don't know." Ethan's voice cracked. "Maybe she did. Maybe that's what all those calls were about, and I was too stubborn to listen." He looked at Hannah, his eyes filled with confusion and hurt. What kind of person doesn't even check who owns the house they're living in? "Someone who was trying to find their place in the world," Hannah said gently, placing her hand on his arm. "Someone who needed space to figure things out." Ethan shook his head, still staring at the papers that had shattered his understanding of the past months. "I've been such a fool." The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily as Ethan and Hannah sat in the library. Evening shadows crept across the room, and the warm glow of antique lamps cast a gentle light over their faces. Ethan hadn't spoken for several minutes, his fingers drumming restlessly on the arm of his leather chair. "I just don't understand," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "All these years, she let me believe this place would be mine." He gestured at the room around them, at the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and ornate moldings. "Every time Dad talked about my inheritance, about carrying on the family legacy, this mansion was part of it." Hannah sat quietly on the sofa across from him, her hands folded in her lap. She'd seen that look of betrayal before, in her own reflection during darker times. "You know what's really getting to me?" Ethan stood up and paced to the window. "I thought I was being so rebellious, so independent by moving in here, like I was finally taking control of my life. He let out a bitter laugh. But the whole time, she knew. She knew I was here, living in her house, and she never said a word. Maybe she had her reasons, Hannah suggested softly. You said yourself that communication isn't your family's strong point. Ethan turned from the window, his face tight with anger. That's putting it mildly. We don't communicate, we manipulate, we don't talk, we maneuver. Everything's a chess game with her, and I'm tired of being a pawn. What do you think she was trying to achieve? Hannah asked, leaning forward slightly. Control. Ethan's response was immediate. It's always about control with her. By letting me think I was rebelling while actually living under her roof, literally under her control, she was probably laughing at me the whole time. Hannah shook her head. That seems harsh. From what you've told me about her, she's controlling, yes, but she also cares about you. Does she? Ethan slumped back into his chair. A mother who cares doesn't keep her son in the dark about his own life. She doesn't let him live in a fantasy world just to maintain her power over him. So what are you going to do? Ethan's jaw set in determination. I'm going to fight for this place. It should have been mine. Dad always said so. There must be some legal way to challenge this. Before you go to war, Hannah said carefully, maybe you should try talking to her first. Find out why she kept this secret. You don't know my mother, Ethan replied, but his voice had lost some of its edge. She'll never give me a straight answer. Hannah stood up and walked over to him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Maybe not. But you deserve to know the truth about your own life, Ethan. And sometimes... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes the only way to get the truth is to be brave enough to ask for it. Ethan looked up at her, his anger giving way to uncertainty. Will you help me? I know I'm asking a lot, but having you here, it helps me think clearer. Of course, Hannah said softly. Whatever you decide to do, I'm here. A moment of silence passed between them, broken only by the steady ticking of the grandfather clock. Outside, the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in deep purples and oranges, casting long shadows across the mansion's manicured lawn. I need to reclaim this place, Ethan said finally, his voice firm but calmer now. I just don't know how to face her after all this time. Scene 1. The sleek black car wound its way through the iron gates of the Montgomery estate, gravel crunching under its tires. Hannah sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching Ethan's knuckles grow white as he gripped the steering wheel. You don't have to do this today, she said softly, but Ethan shook his head. Yes, I do. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the sprawling Georgian mansion ahead. I've waited long enough. The house loomed before them, its red brick facade and white columns a testament to old money and older traditions. Perfectly trimmed hedges lined the circular driveway, and crystal-clear fountains sparkled in the morning sun. Ethan parked the car and took a deep breath. It hasn't changed at all, he muttered, more to himself than to Hannah. Nothing ever changes here. They climbed the wide stone steps to the front door. Before Ethan could ring the bell, the heavy oak door swung open. A tall woman in her 60s stood in the doorway, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her pearl necklace caught the light as she tilted her head. Ethan. Her voice was cool and measured. What an unexpected surprise. Her gaze shifted to Hannah, taking in her simple clothes with a slight narrowing of her eyes. And you've brought a guest. Mother. Ethan's voice was tight. We need to talk. Mrs. Montgomery's perfectly arched eyebrows rose slightly. Do come in, she said, stepping aside. We can discuss whatever's troubling you in the study. They followed her through the house, their footsteps muffled by thick oriental carpets. The study was exactly as Ethan remembered it. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and the overwhelming scent of lemon furniture polish. "Now then," Mrs. Montgomery said, settling into a high-backed chair behind the massive desk. "What brings you here after all this time?" Ethan pulled the property documents from his jacket pocket and dropped them on the desk. "Care to explain these?" His mother glanced at the papers, her expression unchanged. "Ah," she said simply. "I see you've finally done some research." "Research?" Ethan's voice rose. "You mean you've finally been caught in your lie? The mansion was never mine, was it? It's always been yours." "Of course it has." Mrs. Montgomery's tone remained maddeningly calm. "Did you really think we'd let you have full control of such a valuable property at your age? With your history of impulsive decisions?" Hannah watched Ethan's face flush with anger. "My history? You mean my refusal to be your puppet in the family business?" "The family business," Mrs. Montgomery said, "requires dedication, responsibility, and understanding of our traditions, none of which you've demonstrated." "So you let me live in that mansion thinking it was mine, just to teach me some sort of lesson?" Mrs. Montgomery stood, smoothing her silk blouse. "I let you play at independence while keeping you safely within reach. The mansion was never yours, Ethan, and it never will be. Just like you'll never truly belong in this business. You lack the commitment, the vision." "The vision?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "You mean your vision, your control, your rules." "Our family's legacy," she corrected him, "which you've repeatedly shown no interest in preserving. Did you really think living in that mansion was some grand act of rebellion? I've been paying the property taxes, the maintenance costs, everything. You've been living in a fantasy, dear." The drive back to the mansion was silent. Ethan's hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, his face a mask of controlled anger and hurt. Hannah wanted to reach out, to offer some comfort, but she knew he needed this time to process everything. When they finally pulled up to the mansion, his mother's mansion, she corrected herself mentally, Ethan didn't even bother to park properly. He left the car at an awkward angle in the circular driveway and stormed inside, his footsteps echoing through the marble foyer. Hannah followed quietly, watching as he disappeared into his study, the heavy door closing behind him with a decisive thud. The sound seemed to reverberate through the empty house, a physical reminder of the walls Ethan was building around himself. Hours passed. The afternoon sun crept across the polished floors, casting long shadows through the windows. Hannah made tea, leaving a cup outside his door that grew cold, untouched. She could hear him pacing occasionally, the muffled sound of books being pulled from shelves, papers rustling. As evening approached, the mansion grew darker. Hannah switched on a few lamps, their warm light doing little to dispel the heaviness that hung in the air. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, but food seemed unimportant right now. Finally, around 8 o'clock, she couldn't stand the silence anymore. She approached his study and knocked softly on the door. When there was no response, she turned the handle and peered inside. Ethan sat in his leather chair, surrounded by scattered papers and open books. Family photos were spread across his desk, younger versions of himself with his mother at various social events, all wearing perfect smiles that never quite reached their eyes. He looked up as Hannah entered, his face drawn and tired. "I've been going through everything," he said, his voice hoarse. "Tax records, property deeds, old correspondence. She's been planning this for years." He picked up a paper and let it fall back to the desk. "Every detail of my life has been orchestrated by her." Hannah moved quietly into the room, settling into one of the chairs across from his desk. She didn't speak, knowing he needed to work through this in his own way. "You know what the worst part is?" He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I thought I was being so rebellious, so independent, living here, refusing to join the family business. But she was pulling the strings the whole time. I've been living in her dollhouse, playing exactly the role she expected me to play." The room fell silent again. Outside, crickets had begun their evening chorus, and a cool breeze rustled the curtains through the partially open window. Hannah watched as Ethan picked up a photo, himself as a young boy, standing stiffly in a perfectly tailored suit. "My whole life has been a lie," he said quietly, staring at the photograph. Every act of rebellion, every attempt to break free, it was all just part of her game. I don't even know who I am anymore. Hannah remained silent, but she moved her chair closer to his desk. Sometimes, she knew, the most powerful support was simply being present, sharing the weight of someone's pain without trying to fix it. Together they sat in the growing darkness, surrounded by the scattered pieces of Ethan's carefully constructed life. The next morning dawned gray and cold, matching Hannah's mood as she sat in the mansion's kitchen. She wrapped her hands around a steaming mug of coffee, watching raindrops trace patterns down the window panes. The grand house felt emptier than usual, despite its luxurious furnishings. Ethan had barely left his study in the past few days, emerging only for brief moments to grab coffee or make quiet phone calls in the hallway. Hannah had tried to make herself useful, tidying up, preparing meals he barely touched, being available whenever he needed to talk. But as the days stretched on, a nagging doubt began to grow in her mind. She heard his footsteps in the hallway and straightened up, pushing her tangled thoughts aside. Ethan appeared in the doorway, looking tired but more composed than he had been recently. "Morning," he said, heading straight for the coffee pot. "Did you sleep okay?" Hannah nodded, though sleep had been elusive lately. "Yeah, fine." She watched as he poured his coffee, noting how different he looked from the confident man who had first invited her to stay. "Listen, Ethan, maybe I should think about moving on." He turned sharply, coffee sloshing in his cup. "What? Why would you say that?" "It's just—" Hannah struggled to find the right words. "Everything's so complicated right now with your family, and I feel like maybe I'm just in the way. Like I'm just another distraction from what you really need to deal with." Ethan set his cup down and leaned against the counter. "Is that what you think you are? A distraction?" "Aren't I?" Hannah stood up, pacing the kitchen. "You took me in when you were already running away from your problems. And now, with everything that's happening with your mother—" She gestured vaguely at the mansion around them. "I'm just someone else you can focus on instead of dealing with the real issues." "Hannah!" Ethan moved closer, but she stepped back. "I've been homeless, Ethan. I know what it's like to run from problems, to find any excuse not to face reality. And I can't—" She took a deep breath. "I can't be that excuse for you." "You're not an excuse," Ethan said firmly. "You're not a distraction. You're the first person in my life who's actually seen me for who I am, not what my family wants me to be." But Hannah couldn't shake the uncertainty that had taken root in her heart. She looked around the grand kitchen, at the expensive appliances and marble countertops. "Are you sure about that? Or am I just another way to rebel against your mother? Another way to prove you're different from what she wants?" "That's not fair," Ethan protested, but his voice held a note of uncertainty. "Maybe not," Hannah admitted. "But I need to know that I'm not just temporary. That I'm not just here until you figure out your family issues or decide to go back to your old life." Ethan stepped forward again, and this time Hannah didn't move away. He took her hands in his. "You're not temporary," he said softly. "You're the most real thing in my life right now." The sincerity in his voice made Hannah want to believe him, but doubt still lingered. She looked down at their joined hands, his manicured and soft, hers rough from months on the streets. Two different worlds, temporarily intersecting. She wondered how long it could last, how long before reality came crashing back in. "I want to believe you," she whispered, but the uncertainty in her voice said more than her words. Hannah watched from the mansion's front window as Ethan adjusted his tie for the third time. The morning sun cast long shadows across the driveway where his car waited. He hadn't slept well. She'd heard him pacing in his study most of the night, rehearsing what he would say to his mother. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" Hannah asked, her voice soft with concern. "I could come with you." Ethan shook his head, his jaw set with determination. "This is something I need to do by myself. It's time I stood up to her, really stood up to her." He checked his phone, reading the message he'd sent his mother the night before. "She agreed to meet me at the estate. No more running, no more hiding." Hannah stepped forward and straightened his tie, though it didn't need it. "Just remember what we talked about. Stay calm. Speak your truth." "My truth," Ethan repeated, managing a small smile. "That this mansion isn't just about property or money. It's about my life, my choices." He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "I deserve to know why she kept this from me all these years." The drive to his family's estate felt longer than usual. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. The familiar gates opened automatically as he approached, and he pulled up to the grand house where he'd grown up. His mother's Mercedes was already parked in its usual spot. Inside, the house was quiet except for the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the foyer. A maid directed him to his mother's study, where she sat behind her massive mahogany desk, looking as immaculate and imposing as ever. "Mother," Ethan said, standing tall despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "Ethan." She didn't stand to greet him. "I assume this is about the mansion?" "It's about more than that." He moved closer to the desk. "It's about years of lies, of manipulation. Why didn't you tell me the truth about the mansion's ownership?" His mother's face remained impassive. "Would it have made a difference? You've been using it as your personal rebellion against this family anyway." "That's not fair." Ethan's voice rose slightly. "I moved there because I needed space to figure out who I am, what I want from life." "What you want?" His mother's laugh was sharp and cold. "This family's legacy isn't about what you want, Ethan. It's about duty, responsibility, tradition." "Legacy?" Ethan planted his hands on her desk, leaning forward. "What legacy? The one where you hide the truth from your own son? Where you manipulate and control every aspect of his life?" His mother stood slowly, her eyes flashing. "You want the truth? Fine. You will never have that mansion because you don't deserve it. You've never shown the strength, the dedication this family requires." "Mother." "No," she cut him off. "You come here, demanding answers, but you've never earned them. That mansion, this family's legacy, they belong to those who understand sacrifice, who put the family's needs above their own childish desires." The words hit Ethan like physical blows. He stepped back, his carefully prepared arguments crumbling in the face of his mother's contempt. "You will never be part of this family's true legacy, Ethan," she continued, her voice ice cold. "You lost that right when you chose to run away from your responsibilities. The mansion was never yours, and it never will be." Ethan's hands trembled as he pushed open the mansion's heavy front door. The drive back had been a blur, his mother's cruel words echoing in his mind. Hannah was waiting in the living room, curled up on the leather couch with a book. She looked up when he entered, immediately setting the book aside when she saw his face. "Oh, Ethan," she said softly, rising to meet him. He stood there, his usually perfect posture crumpled, his tie loosened and askew. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, catching the moisture in his eyes. Hannah guided him gently to the couch, and he sank into it like a man who'd just run a marathon. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. She said I don't deserve any of this, that I'll never be part of the family legacy. His hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. All these years, I thought if I just tried harder, if I could somehow prove myself. Hannah sat beside him, close enough to offer comfort, but giving him space to process. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking the heavy silence. I don't even know who I am anymore, Ethan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my place in the world, it was all built on lies. He looked around the grand room with its expensive furnishings. Even this place, it was never really mine. I feel completely lost, he admitted, slumping further into the couch. My whole life, everything was planned out. The family business, my role in it, even where I lived. Now, he spread his hands helplessly. Now I don't know what to do, where to go. Hannah was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. She thought about her own journey, the times she'd felt lost and alone, and how she'd learned to find her own way. Ethan, she said gently, turning to face him, maybe this is actually a gift. He looked at her, confusion crossing his tear-stained face. Your mother's expectations, your family's legacy, they've been like chains holding you down, she continued. You've been trying so hard to live up to someone else's vision of who you should be that you never got the chance to figure out who you really are. Hannah reached out and took one of his hands in hers. His fingers were cold, and she squeezed them gently. You don't have to live for anyone else's expectations. Your life is yours to shape. Your future is yours to decide. Ethan's breath hitched slightly. But where do I even start? You start by asking yourself what you want, Hannah said, her voice warm and encouraging. Not what your mother wants, not what the family business needs. What do you want? What makes you happy? What dreams have you pushed aside because they didn't fit into your family's plans? She gestured to the room around them. Your legacy doesn't have to be this mansion or your family's business. You can create your own legacy, one that reflects who you truly are, not who others want you to be. Ethan sat quietly, absorbing her words. For the first time since he'd returned, his shoulders relaxed slightly, and some of the despair left his eyes. He looked at Hannah, really looked at her, seeing the quiet strength and wisdom in her face. My own legacy, he repeated softly, as if testing how the words felt in his mouth. Ethan sat at the kitchen table the next morning, a notepad in front of him and a cup of coffee growing cold at his elbow. Hannah watched as he scribbled notes, crossed them out, and started again. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the marble countertops. I've been thinking, he said, looking up at Hannah. I need to start fresh, really fresh. He tapped his pen against the notepad. I've got some savings of my own, not family money. I think I want to open a small bookstore. Hannah's eyes widened with interest. A bookstore? Yeah. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Remember when I showed you my collection in the library? Books have always been my escape. When I was younger, before the pressure of the family business took over, I dreamed of having my own little shop. Something cozy, you know, with reading nooks and a coffee corner. He pushed the notepad toward her. The page was filled with rough sketches of floor plans and lists of potential locations. I found a few places for rent in the city. They're small, but they're perfect for what I have in mind. Hannah leaned forward, studying his notes. This is amazing, Ethan. I can really see this working. I'm going to move out of the mansion, he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Find a small apartment nearby. Something that's actually mine." He paused, looking around the grand kitchen. "I don't need all this. I never did." Hannah nodded, understanding in her eyes. She knew what it meant to start over, to build something from nothing. "Would you—" Ethan hesitated, then pressed on. "Would you help me with this? You have such good instincts about people, and I could use someone who knows how to connect with others. Plus, you mentioned you used to work in a library before." "Are you offering me a job?" Hannah asked, her voice carefully neutral. "No," Ethan said quickly. "Well, yes, but not just that. I'm asking you to be my partner in this. Equal stakes, equal say in how we run things. I know it's a lot to ask, but—" "Yes," Hannah interrupted, her eyes bright. "Yes, I'd love to help build this with you." They spent the next hour planning, their excitement growing as they discussed possibilities. Hannah suggested adding a community board for local events, while Ethan talked about hosting reading groups and author signings. "You know," Hannah said softly, after they'd filled several pages with ideas, "when you first invited me to stay here, I was so afraid of becoming dependent on you, of losing myself in your world." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "And now? Now I see we're both just trying to find our way, different paths that somehow led us here." She squeezed his hand. "We're not so different after all." "No," Ethan agreed, looking at their joined hands. "We're not. You helped me see that I was trapped in a life that wasn't mine. And now—" He gestured at their planning notes. "Now we can build something real, something that belongs to both of us." The morning light had shifted, filling the kitchen with a warm glow. Their coffee cups were empty, their notepad was full of possibilities, and the weight of expectations that had burdened them both felt lighter. They weren't a wealthy man and a homeless woman anymore. They were just two people ready to start fresh, together. Ethan stood in his bedroom, staring at the massive walk-in closet filled with designer suits and Italian shoes. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the plush carpet. With careful movements, he began taking the suits off their hangers, folding them into neat piles. "I never really liked wearing these," he said softly, running his hand over an expensive silk tie. "They always felt like a costume." Hannah leaned against the doorframe, watching as he worked. "What did you want to wear instead?" "Simple things, comfortable things." He smiled, pulling out a worn leather jacket from the back of the closet. "Like this. Mom hated it when I wore it to family functions, said it wasn't appropriate for someone of our status." He slipped the jacket on, and his whole demeanor changed. His shoulders relaxed, and a genuine smile spread across his face. "This feels more like me." Moving to his dresser, Ethan began sorting through the drawers. He separated his belongings into two piles, things to keep and things to donate. The keep pile was surprisingly small, just a few comfortable sweaters, well-worn jeans, and t-shirts that actually meant something to him. "It's strange," he said, picking up a framed photo of his family from the nightstand. "I spent years trying to fill this place with things I thought would make me happy. But looking at it all now," he gestured around the room, "none of it really matters." Hannah moved closer, watching as he carefully wrapped the few personal photos he wanted to keep. Most of them were from his childhood, before the weight of family expectations had settled on his shoulders. "What matters is who you're becoming now," she said quietly. Ethan nodded, reaching for a small wooden box on his bookshelf. "This was from my grandfather, my dad's father." He opened it, revealing a collection of old fountain pens. "He was different from the rest of them. Used to tell me stories about his travels, about the people he met. He always said that the best stories come from unexpected places." He carefully placed the box in his keep pile, then moved to the library. The room that had been his sanctuary for so many years now felt different, lighter somehow. He ran his fingers along the spines of his favorite books. "These are coming with us," he said firmly. "They're the beginning of our bookstore's inventory." Hannah watched as he carefully selected volumes, creating stacks on the large oak desk. Each book he chose seemed to hold a special meaning, a piece of the person he wanted to be, rather than the one he'd been forced to become. "You know," he said, pausing with a well-worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird in his hands, "I used to hide in here when Mom would have her society parties. I'd imagine owning a little bookshop where people could just be themselves, where stories mattered more than status." He placed the book on top of a stack and turned to face Hannah. "I spent so many years trying to be the son they wanted, trying to fit into this mansion, this life." He gestured around the grand room. "But I was just existing, not living." Hannah stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his arm. She could see the mixture of relief and determination in his eyes, the way he stood straighter now, unburdened by the weight of pretense. This was the real Ethan emerging, the one who had been hidden beneath layers of family expectations and societal pressure. The sunlight streamed through the library's tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. As Ethan continued to sort through his books, Hannah felt a warm surge of pride. He wasn't just packing up his belongings, he was choosing his future, one book at a time. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mansion's circular driveway as Ethan and Hannah loaded the last of their boxes into his old Toyota Camry. He'd chosen this car over his collection of luxury vehicles. It was practical, reliable, and most importantly, it was bought with his own money, not his family's. "That's the last one," Hannah said, closing the trunk with a satisfying thunk. She brushed her hands on her jeans and looked up at the imposing structure they were leaving behind. The mansion's windows seemed to stare back at them, dark and accusatory. Ethan stood beside her, keys dangling from his fingers. He'd changed out of his expensive suits into a simple pair of jeans and his favorite leather jacket. The transformation wasn't just in his clothes. His whole demeanor had shifted. His shoulders were relaxed, his smile easier. "You know," he said, "I always thought leaving this place would feel like giving up, but it feels more like breaking free." Hannah nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The mansion, with all its grandeur and oppressive expectations, had been more of a prison than a home. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from what's hurting us," she said softly. They climbed into the car, the leather seats creaking under their weight. The back seat and trunk were filled with boxes containing their most precious possessions. Books for their future bookstore, Ethan's grandfather's fountain pens, Hannah's small collection of treasured items she'd managed to keep during her time on the streets. Ethan turned the key in the ignition, and the engine hummed to life. His hands rested on the steering wheel, but he didn't put the car in drive just yet. Instead, he took one last look at the mansion through the windshield. "I spent so many years trying to be someone I'm not," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Trying to fill roles that were never meant for me. Being trapped in that car that day, the day you found me, it was like a perfect metaphor for my life. Stuck in a fancy cage, unable to break free on my own." Hannah reached over and squeezed his hand. "But you did break free. You made the choice to change." "With your help," he said, turning to look at her. "You saw me. Really saw me. When I couldn't even see myself. You didn't care about the mansion or the money or any of it. You just cared about who I was underneath it all." The morning sun filtered through the trees lining the driveway, creating patterns of light and shadow on the dashboard. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, as if nature itself was urging them forward. Ethan put the car in drive and slowly pulled away from the mansion. As they passed through the ornate iron gates, he let out a long breath, as if releasing years of pent-up pressure. The road ahead stretched out before them, full of possibilities and uncertainties. He glanced at Hannah, his eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you," he said simply, "for helping me find myself again, for showing me that it's okay to choose my own path." He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I don't know exactly what's ahead of us, but with you beside me, I know I can face anything." The mansion grew smaller in the rearview mirror as they drove away, its imposing silhouette diminishing with each passing moment. But neither of them looked back. Their eyes were fixed firmly on the road ahead, where their new life together was waiting to begin. The small coffee shop buzzed with morning activity as Hannah and Ethan sat across from each other, sharing a plate of chocolate chip muffins. Their laptops were open, and scattered papers covered the wooden table between them. It had been 2 weeks since they'd left the mansion behind, and they were staying at a modest extended-stay hotel while planning their next move. "What about this one?" Hannah pointed to a listing on her screen. "It's a small bookstore for sale in Cedar Grove. The owner's retiring, and the price seems reasonable." Ethan leaned over to look, his reading glasses perched on his nose, a new addition that made him look more like himself than ever before. "Cedar Grove?" he mused, taking a sip of his plain black coffee. "That's about 3 hours from here, isn't it?" "Yeah, far enough to start fresh," Hannah said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She was wearing a new sweater, nothing fancy, but clean and warm, purchased with the money she'd earned from her part-time job at the hotel's front desk. "I like that it's a smaller town," Ethan said, scrolling through the pictures. "And look, there's an apartment above the store. We could live and work in the same place." Hannah's eyes lit up at the possibility. The idea of having a real home again, one that she'd helped build with her own hands, made her heart swell. "We could make it our own," she said softly. "Stock the shelves with books we love. Maybe add a coffee corner." "And that reading nook you were talking about," Ethan added, his face animated, "with comfortable chairs and good lighting?" They spent the morning making calls and sending emails, setting up appointments to view properties. It felt surreal to Hannah, planning a future when just months ago she'd been wondering where she'd sleep each night. But Ethan's presence beside her made it feel real, grounding her in the present moment. A week later, they stood in the empty bookstore in Cedar Grove, their footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Sunlight streamed through the large front windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The space wasn't huge, but it was warm and inviting, with built-in shelves lining the walls and a cozy alcove perfect for their planned reading nook. "The apartment upstairs needs some work," the realtor said, leading them up the narrow staircase. "But it's got good bones." The apartment was simple. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a modest kitchen with dated appliances. But the windows were big, flooding the space with natural light, and there was a small balcony overlooking the town's main street. Hannah watched as Ethan ran his hand along the kitchen counter, looking more at peace than she'd ever seen him. He caught her eye and smiled, and she knew he was thinking the same thing she was. This could be home. They made an offer that afternoon, using the money Ethan had saved from his own investments, separate from his family's wealth. It wasn't nearly as much as he'd had before, but it was theirs, earned honestly and chosen freely. When the keys were finally handed over, Hannah and Ethan stood in their empty apartment, surrounded by boxes and potential. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, and through the open windows, they could hear the gentle bustle of small-town life below. "It's not much," Ethan said, wrapping an arm around Hannah's shoulders. "But it's ours." Hannah leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "It's everything," she whispered, looking around at their new beginning. "It's exactly what we need." The bookstore hummed with quiet activity as sunlight streamed through the newly cleaned windows. 6 months had passed since they'd opened New Chapter Books and Cafe, and the pleasant aroma of coffee mingled with the distinctive scent of books, both old and new. Ethan stood behind the coffee counter, carefully crafting a latte for a regular customer. His hands moved with practiced ease as he created a delicate leaf pattern in the foam. He'd discovered a genuine passion for coffee artistry, spending hours perfecting his technique and researching different beans and brewing methods. "Here you are, Mrs. Chen," he smiled, presenting the cup to the elderly woman who'd become one of their most loyal customers. "I tried a new bean from Guatemala today." Meanwhile, Hannah was in the community room they'd created at the back of the store. What had once been a storage space was now a warm, welcoming area where she held weekly support meetings for people experiencing homelessness. The walls were lined with resource information, and a small kitchenette provided hot drinks and snacks. "The shelter on Oak Street always has openings on Tuesday nights," Hannah explained to a young woman clutching a paper cup of tea. "And I can walk you there myself, if you'd like." Her voice was gentle but confident, shaped by her own experiences and understanding. The woman nodded gratefully, and Hannah wrote down the shelter's address on a card, along with her own phone number. She'd helped dozens of people find temporary housing and job opportunities over the past few months, working closely with local organizations and shelters. Later that afternoon, Ethan checked their monthly accounts while Hannah reorganized the fiction section. The numbers were modest but steady, showing consistent growth. More importantly, the store had become exactly what they'd hoped for, a community gathering place where everyone felt welcome. "The poetry workshop was full again yesterday," Hannah called out from between the shelves. "Sarah asked if we could add another session next month." Ethan looked up from his laptop, smiling. "We could do Thursday evenings. That might work better for people who have day jobs." Their life had found a comfortable rhythm. Each morning, they walked down together from their apartment above the store, Ethan starting the coffee machines while Hannah arranged the fresh pastries delivered from the local bakery. They'd learned to work as a team, supporting each other's dreams while building their own. Ethan had finally found his calling in creating this space where books and coffee brought people together. He'd even started taking business classes at the local community college, learning properly this time, without the pressure of his family's expectations weighing him down. Hannah had discovered her strength in advocacy work, using her experiences to help others find their way back from homelessness. She'd started writing too, working on a memoir that she hoped would help people understand the complex reality of life on the streets. As evening approached and the last customers left, Hannah and Ethan climbed up to their apartment's small balcony. The sky was painted in soft pinks and oranges, and the air was cool and fresh. They sat together on the wooden bench they'd restored, their shoulders touching. "I never thought I'd find this kind of peace," Ethan said softly, watching the sun sink towards the horizon. "Back then, in that locked car, I felt so trapped, not just physically but in my whole life." Hannah reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "And I never thought I'd find a home again," she replied. "Not just a place to live, but somewhere I truly belong." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky slowly darkened, both reflecting on how far they'd come. Their journey hadn't been easy, but they'd found strength in each other, healing their past wounds day by day, small step by small step. The evening light cast long shadows through the bookstore's windows as Ethan watched Hannah helping a young mother select children's books. She knelt beside the woman's toddler, making silly faces as she read from a colorful picture book. The child's delighted giggles echoed through the quiet store. Something shifted in Ethan's heart as he observed the scene. The feeling had been growing for months, but watching Hannah now, her gentle patience, her genuine warmth, it suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. He loved her. Not just the comfortable, steady love they'd built over their time together, but a deep, soul-stirring love that made him want to build a lifetime with her. He touched the small box in his pocket, the one he'd been carrying around for weeks. He'd bought the ring on impulse one afternoon, passing by a small antique shop. It wasn't flashy or expensive, a simple vintage piece with a delicate sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. The moment he'd seen it, he'd known it was perfect for Hannah, who valued meaning over material worth. Later that evening, after they'd closed the store, they went through their usual routine of tidying up. Hannah hummed softly as she straightened the chairs in the reading area, while Ethan wiped down the coffee counter. The familiar rhythm of their movements, the way they worked in comfortable synchronization, only strengthened his certainty. "Want to take our tea up to the roof garden?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. They'd created the small garden space together, filling it with potted herbs and flowers. It had become their favorite spot to unwind after busy days. Hannah nodded, still organizing a stack of magazines. "Just give me 5 minutes to finish here." Ethan's hands shook slightly as he prepared their tea. Chamomile for Hannah, Earl Grey for himself. He added a splash of milk to hers, just the way she liked it. The familiar routine helped calm his nerves. Up on the roof, their little garden was bathed in the soft glow of the string lights they'd hung between the planters. The evening air was cool but pleasant, carrying the scent of the lavender Hannah had planted in the spring. They settled into their usual spot, a comfortable bench surrounded by flowering plants. Hannah wrapped her hands around her warm mug, breathing in the steam. "The community meeting went well today," she said. 3 people found temporary housing, and Sarah's starting her new job next week." Ethan listened, marveling at how naturally Hannah had grown into her role as an advocate for others. She'd taken her own painful experiences and transformed them into a force for good, helping others find their way forward, just as she had. "Hannah," he said softly, during a pause in her story. His heart was pounding, but he'd never felt more certain about anything. "You know how much you've changed my life, right?" She turned to look at him, her expression softening. "You changed mine too. When you found me that night, locked in my car, I was lost in every way possible. But you didn't just help me get out of that car. You helped me find myself." He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You showed me what real strength looks like, what it means to be truly free." Setting his tea aside, Ethan slid off the bench onto one knee, pulling out the small box. Hannah's eyes widened as he opened it, revealing the vintage ring nestled inside. "I love you, Hannah. Will you marry me?" A smile broke across Hannah's face, bright as sunrise. "Yes," she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "Yes, I will." The morning sun streamed through the windows of their small apartment above the bookstore, casting warm patches of light across the kitchen table where Hannah and Ethan sat surrounded by notebooks and papers. Steam rose from their coffee cups as they discussed their future together. "I love this place," Hannah said, running her hand along the worn wooden table. "It feels like home already." She glanced around their cozy kitchen with its mismatched chairs and herbs growing in mason jars along the windowsill. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "Then let's stay here. We don't need anything fancy." His eyes crinkled with warmth as he remembered the mansion he'd left behind. "This is more real than that big empty house ever was." Hannah squeezed his hand. "Are you sure? We could look for something bigger if you want." "I'm sure." He gestured to their surrounding space. "Look at what we've already built here. The bookstore downstairs, our little roof garden. It's perfect." They spent the morning plotting out their shared vision, their excitement growing with each new idea. Hannah pulled out a fresh piece of paper and started sketching floor plans for the bookstore's basement. "We could turn this space into a resource center," she explained, her eyes bright with possibility. "A place where people who are struggling can come for help. We could offer job training, counseling, maybe even temporary shelter." Ethan leaned forward, studying the sketch. "We could partner with local businesses for job placement programs." He grabbed another piece of paper and started jotting down names. "I still have some connections who'd be willing to help." "And the bookstore could provide employment opportunities too," Hannah added, "like we did with Sarah and Marcus." They worked through lunch, their coffee going cold as they mapped out their plans. Hannah's practical experience with homelessness and Ethan's business knowledge blended perfectly as they outlined their vision for a charity that would offer real, sustainable help to people in need. "We could call it New Chapter Foundation," Ethan suggested, writing it at the top of their planning sheet. "Since it's about helping people start fresh, and we're running it from a bookstore." Hannah's eyes welled up slightly. "It's perfect." She thought about her own new chapter, how a chance encounter on a cold night had changed everything. "We could really make a difference, couldn't we?" "We already are," Ethan reminded her, thinking of the people they'd helped through their informal efforts so far. "This will just help us do more." They spent the afternoon working out practical details, budgets, permits, paperwork they'd need to file. Hannah's knowledge of local resources and community needs proved invaluable as they identified gaps their foundation could fill. "What about the spare room upstairs?" Hannah suggested. "We could convert it into an office for the foundation, keep everything organized in one place." Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "And we can use the community room in the bookstore for workshops and training sessions." As they worked, their shared excitement grew. This wasn't just about planning their wedding or their life together anymore. It was about creating something meaningful that could help others find their way forward, just as they had helped each other. "This feels right," Hannah said softly, looking at their plans spread across the table. "Like everything we've been through was leading us here." "It does," Ethan agreed, pulling her close. "We're going to build something amazing together." 6 months after opening the New Chapter Foundation, Hannah stood at the entrance of their bookstore, watching as people filtered in for the morning job training workshop. The basement space they'd renovated now hummed with activity, a far cry from the dusty storage room it had been. "Coffee's ready," Ethan called from behind the counter, setting up a carafe and paper cups for the workshop participants. He'd gotten into the habit of arriving early to brew fresh coffee and set out pastries from the bakery down the street. Sarah, their first employee, and now the foundation's assistant director, arranged chairs in a circle while talking to Marcus, who'd recently been promoted to store manager. Both of them had come through the foundation's program themselves, and their success stories inspired others. "We're expecting 15 people today," Hannah said, checking her clipboard. 3 of them are coming back for follow-up sessions." She smiled, remembering how nervous she'd been about their first workshop with just 4 participants. Ethan walked over and wrapped an arm around her waist. "Remember when we thought the basement was too big for what we needed?" He gestured at the space, now filled with computers for job searches, a small library of resources, and comfortable seating areas where people could meet with counselors. "Look who's here," Hannah whispered, nodding toward the door. Lisa, one of their first participants, walked in wearing a crisp business suit. She'd recently landed a job at a local accounting firm after completing their computer skills program. "Just wanted to stop by and say thank you again," Lisa said, approaching them with a bright smile. "I got my first paycheck yesterday and—" She paused, blinking back tears. "I signed a lease. I have my own place now." Hannah hugged her tightly, remembering her own journey from homelessness to stability. "We're so proud of you, Lisa." As more people arrived, Ethan watched Hannah move through the room, greeting everyone by name, asking about their progress, offering encouragement where needed. She had a gift for making people feel seen and valued, something he'd experienced firsthand. The workshop began, and Ethan stepped back to observe. Today's session focused on interview skills, with local business owners volunteering their time to conduct practice interviews. The room buzzed with nervous energy and determination. During a break, Ethan slipped upstairs to their apartment to grab some files. He paused at his desk, picking up a framed photo of the mansion he'd left behind. Next to it sat a simple snapshot of their bookstore's grand opening, with Hannah cutting the ribbon while their first group of program participants cheered. The contrast between the two images struck him deeply. The mansion represented everything he'd thought he needed to prove himself: status, wealth, his family's approval. But this small bookstore, with its worn wooden floors and endless possibilities, had given him something far more valuable. Heading back downstairs, he caught snippets of conversation: someone celebrating a successful interview, another person sharing leads on affordable housing, two participants making plans to carpool to their new jobs. This was his legacy now, not the family business he'd once desperately tried to fit into. Hannah caught his eye across the room and smiled, that same warm smile that had changed his life on a cold night months ago. She was helping a young man with his resume, her genuine care evident in every interaction. Together, they weren't just running a charity. They were building a community, offering others the same chance at transformation they'd found themselves. The afternoon sun streamed through the bookstore's windows, casting warm patches of light across the wooden floors. Hannah and Ethan stood near the entrance, watching as the last of today's workshop participants headed home, their faces bright with newfound hope. "I still can't believe how far we've come," Hannah said softly, leaning against Ethan's shoulder. She gazed around the space they'd created together, shelves lined with books, walls covered with success stories and job postings, and corners filled with comfortable chairs where people could find respite from their struggles. Ethan squeezed her hand. "Remember when we first talked about this? Back when we were leaving the mansion?" His voice carried a hint of amazement. It seemed like such a distant dream then. Hannah nodded, thinking back to those uncertain days. "We had no idea if it would work, just hope and determination." She walked over to the community board, where photographs of their program graduates smiled back at them. "But look at all these faces, Ethan. Each one represents a life changed." "Just like you changed mine," Ethan said, following her. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You helped me see that true wealth isn't about money or status. It's about making a difference in people's lives." Sarah approached them with a stack of papers. "Tomorrow's workshop is full," she announced proudly, "and we've got 3 more businesses interested in joining our job placement program." "That's wonderful," Hannah beamed. She turned to face Ethan after Sarah walked away. "Remember when we worried about finding enough participants? Now we're having to create waiting lists." They walked together through the space, straightening chairs and tidying up after the day's activities. Every corner held meaning: the computer station where Lisa had learned the skills that landed her accounting job, the counseling room where Marcus had first opened up about his struggles, the small kitchen where they shared meals and stories. "We're not just providing services," Ethan reflected, pausing by the resource center. "We're building a family here." His eyes met Hannah's, filled with love and gratitude. "A different kind of family than the one I was born into, but one that matters so much more." Hannah reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "And we're just getting started," she said, her voice full of quiet joy. "Every person who walks through that door brings new possibilities, new stories waiting to unfold." They stood together in comfortable silence, taking in the peace of the empty space, The late afternoon light painted everything in soft gold, making the worn floors and simple furnishings look almost magical. On the wall, their foundation's mission statement caught the light. Every ending is a new beginning. "You know what makes me happiest?" Ethan asked, turning to face Hannah. "It's not just about helping people find jobs or homes. It's about showing them that they matter, that their stories matter." Hannah smiled, thinking of her own journey from that cold night when she'd found Ethan locked in his car. "Sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you," she said softly. "One person seeing your worth when you can't see it yourself." Ethan pulled her close, their hearts beating in sync. Together they'd built something beautiful from their broken pieces, a place of healing, hope, and transformation. Their love had grown deeper through every challenge, stronger with every life they touched.